Hey guys, hope you are having a great day today. I'm just going to pick up where I left off yesterday and we'll just go from there. So finally, I told myself I would just lie down and try and brainstorm a good name. Instead, I fell asleep. Just as the cop dropped me off the next morning, I saw Mr. Hassler and some guy walking towards the horse barn. I did not take my time getting to the barn that morning. I sprinted all the way. By the time I caught up with them, Mr. Hassler was standing outside the foal's stall, and the other guy was inside looking at him. I could hear the little guy making some funny noises. I thought they were whinnies. Mr. Hassler nodded at me. "Morning, Sean. Doc Wharton, I'd like you to meet Sean Parker. He let James and me assist him with the delivery last night." The doctor turned and looked at me. He was holding the foal back because he was straining to get to me. "Well, young man, nice job. You've got a fine colt here, even though he did show up to the party almost 2 weeks early." I blurted out the first thing that came to my mind. "I thought he was a foal." Doc Wharton chuckled, but Mr. Hassler answered me without cracking a smile. "A foal is a baby horse, true, but a colt is a baby horse, and a filly is a girl." "Oh," I said, feeling stupid. "So, have you come up with a name for him yet, Sean?" I didn't say anything. The colt had broken free of the vet and was pushing his muzzle into my hand, looking for breakfast. It was the first time I had seen him standing up since I had cleaned him. He was still coppery all over, but for the first time I noticed that his front legs had matching white socks. "Aw, listen to him nicker to you. He has definitely taken a shine to you," Doc Wharton exclaimed. Nicker. The word triggered a memory. When my grandfather was still alive, I spent a lot of time with him. I think it was my parents' way of trying to get me out of the way while they tried to work things out. I didn't mind, though. I loved listening to that old man. And I remembered that sometimes he would talk about wearing knickers when he was a little boy. This colt would be wearing his knickers permanently. I turned to Mr. H., who was still watching me. "Nicker," I said. "Look, he's wearing his knickers." At first Mr. Hassler didn't move. Then his whole face lit up with a grin. "Nicker he is," he said, "and nicker he will until he gets his breakfast. Come on, Sean, I'll show you how to fix it for him." Mr. Hassler didn't stick around while I fed Nicker, and he had James show me how to feed the other horses in the barn. That project took a while, and by the time we got to the last horse, even I could tell they were getting impatient. It would have taken so long, but James seemed to feel he had to explain everything to me in detail. He kept saying, "Boss would want you to know this," or "being a city boy, you probably don't know this." I'm sure he thought he was being a good instructor, but I decided he kept explaining things because he liked to hear himself talk. Once we finished and he had informed me that he'd show me what to do for the evening feeding. Later that afternoon, he got me started in on the stalls in the main barn. I had to get all the old straw and anything in it out of the stall and then replace it with fresh straw. By now, I was almost used to the smell and I didn't mind the work so much. It was actually kind of fun kind of a good feeling to be able to turn around and say, "Yeah, I did that." Most of the horses were out in the field, so I didn't have to worry about them. At the same time, though, I wished that the horses were in the barn. I would have liked to have been able to watch them. Star was one of the 5 that were still in their stalls when I came to clean. I went into his stall, and before I went in, I spent enough time looking at him to discover that he was actually a she. I petted her on the forehead again, gathering my courage to actually go into the stall with her. Amanda had taken a nasty chunk out of Mr. H.'s arm last night, and I was a little nervous about being in close quarters with a full-grown horse again. Everything turned out fine, though. She just sniffed me when I came in. And then when I started shoveling, she ignored me. When I got to the second stall with a horse in it, I only hesitated a moment before going in. and by the time I got to the fifth one, I had no problem giving the horse a shove to get him to move on so I could clean his stall. James came to get me for lunch. Before going to wash up, I stopped to check on Knicker. It was nearly driving me crazy to be in the same barn and not be able to spend any time with him. Several times I almost walked down to check on him, but I was determined not to let Mr. H catch me lollygagging again. Somehow I just knew he'd show up the second I tried to take a peek at Knicker. "Hey, Knicker, what's up?" I asked. I felt a prickling on the back of my neck when I saw him lying there in the straw. His eyes were not bright and soft. They looked dull. "Knicker? Hey, Nick." He didn't even look up when I said his name. "Here." A bottle was shoved roughly at me. I looked at Mr. H. He was busy blowing his nose. I entered the stall and sat down, pulling Knicker's head onto my lap. He started nursing. There was not a lot of energy in it. I looked up at Mr. H. "What's wrong with him?" He shook his head. "Come on up to the house. When he's eaten all that he will, we'll talk about it over lunch." I sat there just talking to Knicker, trying to get him interested in lunch. For about 45 minutes I wanted to believe I saw a difference when I left him, but I knew that that was just my hope, not the reality. I trudged up to the house to wash my hands, hoping that Mr. H could tell me how we were going to help Knicker. Lunch once again tasted excellent, but I really didn't even notice what I was eating. Mr. H and I talked through the whole hour. "What's wrong with him?" I asked again. Mr. H sighed around his pipe, shaking his head. "Gotta tell you, we're really not sure. The doc did not find anything physically wrong with him, so we think it may be his heart." "But you just said there wasn't anything physically wrong with him," I began. "Boy, don't you know that some heartaches are not physical?" I pushed the food around my plate, not wanting to let Mr. H see my eyes. "You mean," I said, trying to control my voice, "he misses his mom." "Yeah," he said softly, "he sure does. But I would rather he miss his mom than be hurt by her." "Can't you just put him with someone else's mom?" Mr. H shook his head. "Unfortunately, we don't have any mares that would take him right now. They're either getting ready to have their foals in a couple of months, or they've got foals that are 6 months old or older. We need a mare who's got a brand new baby, or one that just lost her baby, and we don't have either." It wasn't until dessert that I remembered to ask Mr. Hassler about imprinting. He looked surprised when I told him that I had looked it up in my dictionary. "Well," he drawled, "you're right. I did sort of mean that you have a lasting impression on Knicker, but I meant just a little bit more than that." I waited impatiently as he served me a brownie smothered with 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream. When a young animal imprints, it means that they think the first being that they had contact with is their parent. I choked on my brownie. "You mean Knicker thinks I'm his mom?" Mr. H grinned, but it was a sad grin. "I thought last night that he might have. I was hoping that this morning that he had, because he was so excited to see you. But the way he's looking right now, I'm not so sure." Work that afternoon took forever. I kept going to see Knicker's stall, talking to him, encouraging him. I didn't care if Mr. H caught me or not. By the time the cop came to get me, though, I knew Mr. H didn't tell me, but I knew. Knicker would not make it through the night. The cop dropped me off with a cheerful reminder that he would get me again tomorrow for my last day at Carbondale Ranch. I walked inside and started towards my room. "Where do you think you're going?" I stopped in the middle of the hall and turned around. I hadn't even seen my mother in the darkness of the living room, but there she was, sprawled out on the couch. "I'm going to sleep," I said, and I continued down the hall. "Get back here, mister. Now that you're working full time, you're going to have to start pulling your wage around here. I think half of your wages is only fair." "Mom," I said. not even turning around. I'm not working a job. I'm doing community service. I don't even get paid for that. Oh, don't you give me that. She had come up behind me now, and she spun me around to face her. I'm so sick of you, she hissed. I tried to pull back from the whiskey on her breath. Fine, Mom. Why don't you just call the cops and ask them to garnish my wages? Crack. She let me have one across the face and then slammed me into the wall, pinning me so I could not get away from her breath. How dare you get snotty with me? How dare I? How dare you? I cried. How dare you steal money from me? She slapped me again, but I was determined to finish. I'm only a kid, and I'm your kid, and you treat me like dirt. She really hit me hard then, and my head slammed back against the wall into a nail that was all that remained of a picture that she had sold 3 years ago, and I passed out. When I came to, I was still in an uncomfortable pile on the floor. My mother was gone. I got up and I stumbled into my room, stopping in the doorway. My room was in shambles. She had torn it apart looking for my stash. The room swayed back and forth, and only the door frame kept me from falling over. Images flashed through my mind, images of my mother with my father, with me. None of these images were of a smiling, friendly woman. They were all bitter and angry, tear-stained. None of them were loving, and something inside of me finally broke. I ran out into the night. I ran to the school and walked around the parking lot in circles, trying to calm down, trying to come up with some answers. The school was halfway between my house and the ranch. I decided I might as well go to the ranch. I really didn't have anywhere else to go. As I jogged the rest of the 2 miles to Carbondale Ranch, these phrases kept going through my mind. I'd rather he miss his mom than to be hurt by her. Aw, listen to him nicker to you. How dare you respect life? And I'd rather he miss his mom than be hurt by her. Chapter 6. I can't believe he didn't show up this morning. A distant voice barely filtered through the fog in my mind. Something tickled my nose and I brushed it away. I heard some more mumbled words, but I couldn't make them all out. I wanted to wake up, but I also wanted to sleep forever, and I couldn't do either. I thought we had gotten through to him, or at least that Nicker had. My nose kept itching and my arm was under something heavy. You just can't tell with these kids anymore, especially this one. When I say no one was at home, I mean no one. We haven't been able to get a hold of his mom since Saturday afternoon when she picked him up at the station. In fact, one of his teachers called the station asking about Sean. She showed more concern about him than his mother did. I tried to burrow closer to the warm spot on my right. The blankets weren't very thick, but I was pretty comfortable, except for my right arm. Whatever was on it was so heavy I couldn't even move it. Well, I'll be, the voice said softly. It sounded a little closer this time. Hey, I wonder. Shh, softly. Look at those two, plopped together in the hay like a litter of puppies. The weight shifted off my arm, but I couldn't get the weight off my eyelids. I honestly could not have opened my eyes at that moment to save my life. Morning, Nicker. No one needs to ask if you're feeling better. Nicker nickered, and my nose itched again. I felt Nicker leave, and all the warmth left with him. I reached up again to try and brush the straw off my face. Nicker came back and bumped my forehead with his nose. This time my eyes flew open. The bolts of pain going from my head down my spine were unreal. I thought I was going to pass out again. Good morning, Sean. The cop was grinning like an idiot at me. Mr. H wasn't grinning at all. Sean, if you need a place to sleep, all you need to do is ask. You do not have to sneak into a stall like a common thief. I didn't answer either of them. I was concentrating too hard on not passing out again. At the same time, I was trying not to think at all, because it just made my head pound more. Sean, are you all right? I knew I was making a face. I don't know. I don't think I am. I blinked, trying to keep them in focus, but I was not successful. The world went dark. When I woke up again, I was in a strange room, lying in a strange bed and wearing strange clothes. I sat up slowly and found a large glass of water on the table next to the bed. I drank more than half of it before I noticed the small bottle of pills with my name on it. The directions said 4 times a day, so I took one. The clock in the room was running, but I was sure it wouldn't be right because it said 2:30. I waited for a while, but that got old pretty quickly. I wandered down the hall and found my way to Mr. Hassler's living room. I had only walked through it twice, and I hadn't paid much attention to what was in it. I took my time looking at all the old stuff he had. He didn't have much, so I figured what he did have must mean something to someone. There were 4 pictures of trains, kind of clustered together. A few feet away, a bunch of colored photos of horses were tacked to the wall in a sort of collage. A couple of the pictures had ribbons by them. One of the pictures looked just like Nicker, and I wondered if it was his brother or sister. On the opposite wall, there was an old black and white photo in a silver frame. There was a lady in it standing in front of a small house. She looked happy, like she didn't have a care in the world. When I looked at the picture carefully, I realized she was standing in front of this house. It must have had some additions made over the years. The only other thing on that wall was a framed collection of some sort. Several medals and badges, a small bullet, and what looked like a piece of shrapnel were laid on a neat piece of material and framed. The glass had a thick coating of dust on it. "Sean, the doctor's not going to like seeing you up." I turned around. "Why not? I'm fine." Mr. Hassler shook his head. "No, boy, you're not. You have a mild concussion and a nasty infection from a wound on the back of your head. Doc says we need to watch it carefully or it might spread, and that would be bad news, as close as it is to your spine." Rubbing the bandage on the back of my head, I remembered the rusty nail in the hallway. "Oh." Mr. Hassler watched me, and I watched him back. After a few minutes, he said, "Go on now, back to bed with you." "But I've got work to do." "We'll do it. You just have to get your hours later. I want to at least see Nicker." "Good," he said. "I'm glad you want to go see him. But I'm afraid you're going to have to wait until tomorrow." I shook my head. "If he really thinks I'm his mom, and if I spend the night with him and I don't show up today, he's going to be really confused. He needs me right now. He may not need me tomorrow." We locked gazes. "I'm not going to look away," I promised myself. "I want this, and I'm going to have to be tough to get it. That means not looking away and not backing down." His eyes were most unreadable pieces of blue ice I have ever seen. I really didn't think I'd be able to bluff him into it. After an eternity, though, he agreed. "Half an hour." I shook my head. "I need at least an hour. 45 minutes. He cut me off when I began to speak. "And you better take advantage of it now. I do not get generous like this very often." I turned around to go to the stables, hiding my smile. "There's a jacket by the door that will probably fit you." "That's all right. I don't need a jacket." "Sean?" The warning in his voice made me look at him over my shoulder. The expression on his face made me say, "Okay, all right, I'll wear it." I had my hand on the doorknob when he said my name again, and I turned back to look at him. "Sean, would you like to stay here tonight?" "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "I would." "You'll need to call your mom when you get back from feeding Nicker." "That won't be necessary," I said, slipping out the door. "Hey there, Nicker," I said as I entered the stall. He got up, stepped quickly over to me, and butted me with his head. I laughed. "Hey, okay, I know I've been ignoring you all day, but at least I came to see you last night." He butted me again. "What? Do you want something? Do you want this bottle? Do you? You don't really want to eat and get healthy and go beat up all the other little colts and fillies that had the sense to be born on time, do you?" He butted me about 4 times during that little speech, and finally I gave in. Okay, here you go." He was eating like he did the first night, head and tail bobbing up and down in the same rhythm. When he finished, he blinked his eyes at me sleepily. I yawned back at him and sat down. He walked around me and then lay down right next to me, putting his head on my lap. "Nicker, I don't think you think I'm your mom. I think you're even more confused than that. I think you're a puppy. You're a horse, silly. And you're going to be able to do this when you get big. You're not going to be able to do this when you get big. Nicker didn't seem to care. He closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. After a while, I did too. When I woke up, Nicker was butting me again. I could almost hear him say, "Hey, lazy, get up. I'm hungry." Someone had come in and dropped a blanket over me. They had also left me a pillow and a fresh bottle for Nicker, and they had left a can of Hawaiian punch and my pills. It wasn't too hard to guess who had done that. I took my first pill, which wasn't easy, what with Nicker headbutting me all the time. I fed him again, folded up the blanket, and set it on the pillow on the overturned bucket outside the stall. As soon as I stepped out of the stall, I heard whistling. I went over to the next stall, and Mr. Hassel was there sitting on a stack of 2 bales of hay, polishing his saddle. He didn't even look up. "Go on and wash up. James will be done fixing dinner within a few minutes." Then he did look up, with a grin that lit up his whole face. "I thought I was going to have to come wake you, Sleeping Beauty." I grinned back. "Nah, Nicker was too hungry to let that happen." He nodded. "Nicker's looking better. I think he'll be all right now. You don't need to sleep with him tonight. You'll do better in a real bed." "Have you been out here long?" I asked casually. "About an hour," he answered, just as casually. "Long enough to know you snore pretty loud. I'm surprised Nicker didn't kick you out of his stall." I laughed and started out of the barn. "Sean," he continued, and I turned back, "I'm not going to make you tell me what's going on, but I can't let you stay here without calling your mom. That's a real good way for me to get in trouble." I couldn't see his face because he was still in the other stall, but I could tell that even though he sounded uncomfortable saying it, he meant it. "Okay, I'll give her a call after supper." "Good enough. Thank you, Sean." I left the barn and Nickering and headed up the well-lit house to wash my hands. Dinner was relaxed and easy. We talked about the work of the day. James gave me grief because I hadn't done any of it, and the work to be done tomorrow. Mr. H promised James I'd make up for them. "Oh, hey," I said suddenly, "I can't." "What do you mean?" James asked. "Today's Wednesday, right?" "Yeah." "Well, that means I have to go back to school tomorrow. They're going to stick me in a room for 8 hours with nothing to do when I could be here with Nicker." "So don't go," James said simply. "Yeah, but then as soon as I do go back, I still have to serve my in-house suspension time. They won't excuse me from it." "Actually, Sean, they have already excused you from it." I turned back to look at Mr. H. "What?" He shifted in his chair. I called your principal this morning and I had a chat with him." "And?" "And I asked if I could keep you here for the rest of the week instead of having you waste your time in in-house suspension." He agreed. "Yes. And I won't have to do any more in-house when I go back?" "Nope." I shook my head. "I don't get it. I have friends whose parents have called and argued, and they still made them do the in-house time. They never have dropped it before. How'd you get them to drop it?" "Well," he shifted again, "there is a catch." "I know it," I said, throwing my napkin down on my empty plate. "What's the catch?" "You have to stay on the ranch until you go back to school on Monday. The only other places you can go is to your house. You need to be at one of those 2 locations at all time, and you must be with a parent or guardian." He paused. "Those are the court orders, Sean. I talked to the judge today." I could tell by the way he said it, he was trying to warn me to take it seriously. I was thinking of something else. "Can I just stay here?" "Sure." Before I could respond, he added quickly, "As long as your mom or dad agrees." I bit my lip. James stood up. "I guess it's time for me to do the dishes," he said, as he began to clear the table. "I'll give James a hand. Why don't you go into the other room and try and get a hold of your parents?" Mr. Hassler said, getting up. I called my mom, even though I knew she wouldn't be home. I let the phone ring like 20 times before I hung up. I just sat there staring at the phone for a long time. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed 411. "City, please?" the operator droned. "Fort Lewis." "Name?" "Parker. S.J. Parker." "I show 3 S.J. Parkers." "Is there one on Maple Drive?" "One moment, please." Then the recorded voice came on the line. "The number is 468-9753. I hung up and stared at the phone some more. I really did not want to make this phone call. I would not have even considered it, except, well, Mr. H had worked out a deal for me, and I wanted to be able to make good on it. But if I made this phone call, it would mean that this week I had more contact with my father than I had in years. What do you say to a man you never see, or that you no longer trust, or even respect? I did not want to tell him about anything that had happened in the last few days, but I knew I might need to explain some of it to him. Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe he wouldn't even ask. Then again, he might ask. After all, he had shown up to school on Friday. I took a deep breath and I dialed quickly. Hello? I froze. I knew I had dialed the correct number, but this was a woman's voice and she was giggling. Hello? Her giggling voice had slowed down. In the background, I heard a man's voice. Then the man took the phone. Hello? Who is this? Hello? The man's voice was harsh, demanding, and angry. The man's voice was my father's. I hung up the phone. All right, that is the end of this section. Make sure you answer the question on the Canvas page and tune back in later for the next reading